I built a full-on replay mod for the Hytale Modding Contest. I started from scratch 3 weeks before the deadline and had to deal with the most crazy challenges. This is not a small project. The original replay mod from Minecraft took 2 people over a year to make. But first, what is a replay mod? Let's take an example. You just built your beautiful house in Hytale and want to do a time-lapse of the process. What can you use for that? Hytale's Machinima? Well, it only lets you animate characters by hand, maybe a simple camera mod. Then you can build at the same time. Ask a friend or connect another account to record yourself. Yes, but you can't make a smooth camera path or change it after the fact. That's when a replay mod comes in. It records everything that happened in game and allows you to replay it so you can set up a custom camera path, change the speed or the time of the day. Okay, so where do we even start? How can we record what happened in game and replay it? So I looked at how it works in Minecraft, and a replay mod usually does that by recording packets. Packets are like small messages sent between the server and the client, meaning the game running on your PC. For example, spawn this player here or this block changed. So the mod records those packets into a file, and then when you want to replay it, the mod reads the file, sends those packets back to the client, and the client can recreate the scene. Sounds easy enough. Hopefully we can just do the same thing in Hytale. The thing is, I have never made a Hytale mod before, so I went through and started looking online, and I found this website called Hytale Modding. I spent a lot of time going through it, and it looks like listening to packets in Hytale is actually pretty easy, so I just made my first test. And well, it kind of works. The replay is working, that's great, but why are there no animations? I think the reason is because I am recording the packets the server is sending to me, but the server doesn't need to send me animations packets for myself, because my client already knows what I'm doing. And that's a problem, because Hytale mods are server-side, meaning I cannot modify the client in any way to force it to play these animations. I have to solve it from the server. So I had a funny idea to solve my problem. What if I use a cameraman? I know that sounds strange, but listen. I spawn an invisible fake player that follows me around, the server sees that fake player and just thinks it's a real player looking at me, so it sends it all the packets that it would normally send to someone watching me, which includes my animations. So instead of recording what the server sends to me, I record what it sends to my invisible cameraman. And now, that's much better. At this point, the basic replay system is working. But I still have one big issue. Sometimes I randomly get this. Yeah, and this bug almost killed my PC, but I'll get back to it later. The reason this happens is because packets do not contain blocks by the name, they use numerical IDs. The problem is that those IDs can change. So my replay might say, place block 32 here. But when I replay it later, block 32 is not the same block anymore. I found that when you connect to a server, it goes through a setup phase where it sends all the data needed to map these IDs correctly. But my recording starts after that phase, so the replay is completely missing that information. The solution was to force the correct setup packets to be sent before the replay starts, so the client has the right IDs. That sounds simple? It was really not. I had to make the player reconnect, intercept the setup packets, replace them with the ones from the recording, and only then start the replay properly, while dodging all the bugs from the Hytale code itself. But after a lot of pain, it finally worked. So now I have a replay system that can finally replay the word correctly. I did skip a lot of the process because it really was just trial and error for days until I got something good. But I also made some very simple UI to start and stop recording, save and rename a replay, and list your available replays. Which means now it is time for my favorite part, the editor. So let's start building the UI. The goal is to have timelines, properties, and keyframes. A property is something that can change over time. For example, camera position, FOV, speed, and each value on the timeline is a keyframe. So you place a camera keyframe here, another one here, and the editor smoothly interpolates between them. So I started building the overall structure first, the editor state, the timeline, properties, and keyframes. Now let's start working on the actual UI. Let's begin with a simple static layout just to see how everything will look. The editor obviously needs a timeline with a playhead to scrub in the replay and some buttons here. I think I got something pretty decent, but we are definitely missing a lot of stuff. The rest needs to be generated by code so it can be dynamic. Let's start simple by making the playhead move and wire the buttons. And we can also recalculate the whole layout when we want to zoom in. To make this, I had to write my very own UI framework, because using the Hytale UI system directly is rough. The UI system is actually pretty good, but it also has some very specific limitations. For example, I went through the whole documentation and I did not find any way to make a specific element draggable. So how are we going to do our keyframes? I don't know, we'll see. But for now, we have a bigger problem. I just noticed while testing that when I click on play, it works just fine. But when I click again to pause, it just gets ignored and keeps playing. If I click like 20 times, it finally pauses, but why? At first, I thought my UI framework was broken, but it turns out the problem is within Hytale's UI system itself. When the server sends a UI update to the client, it waits for the client to send back an acknowledgement before accepting any new UI event. And any UI event that happens between the update and the acknowledgement just gets dropped. That's fine for basic menus and guarantees more stability, but in my editor, the playhead moves every game tick, or 30 times a second, which means the UI updates constantly, dropping almost all events. Thankfully, since all of this logic is server-side, I was able to replace the player's UI manager with a custom one that accepts all events. And everything works fine again. Now let's finish the UI. I added a multi-timeline system with this drop-down, then we can generate the time codes, and finally we can place the properties and keyframes with some interactions to add and remove a keyframe. That is looking really good. Now remember the keyframe dragging issue I talked about? It's time to do something about it. Right now it is just images, and like I said, there is just no way to tell Hytale to make this draggable. So I obviously thought about using sliders, but there is one small problem with it. I can make them sliders with an invisible background, just like the playhead, and stack them on top of each other. The issue is that even if the slider background is invisible, it still exists and catches mouse events. So when I have multiple keyframes stacked on the timeline, clicking anywhere on the line will just interact with the last on top, which is not what we want. So I used a different workaround. By default, every keyframe is a button. When I click on a keyframe, it becomes selected, and only the selected keyframe turns into a slider. So now I can drag it, and when I'm done, it turns back into a button. Perfect. I quickly realized that sliders are the solution to all my problems, so I also used it for the clickable preview area. It's just a giant invisible slider, because I wanted that when you click on it, you instantly take control of the game without having to release the mouse button, which you just can't do with a button. You only get the event when you release. But with a slider, I can get the event instantly if its value changed. We are finally done with the UI. Now that the editor can create camera keyframes, I need the camera to actually move. Hytale has two main ways to control the camera. The first one is to teleport the player. Since the replay is viewed from the cameraman's point of view, I can just teleport the player around and use that as the camera. The other option is to use Hytale's server camera feature. Unfortunately, both options have problems. If I use teleportation, entities flicker a little bit when rotating the camera. But if I use server camera, it randomly fails depending on the PC and starts flickering uncontrollably. So I obviously use both. I teleport the player for the position, and I use server camera for the rotation. That's what gave the best result, and it works on my PC, so after that I added some finishing touches like undo and redo, which I know sounds basic, but a lot of software still doesn't have it. And then came the part when my PC almost died. Remember the setup phase bug with the wheel blocks? Well, 3 days before the deadline, I had a great idea. I thought maybe I don't need to reconnect the player to send the setup packets. Maybe I can just send those packets and change their phase from setup to update. Not a bad idea, so I tried it, and it did not go very well. Sometimes the block started rendering completely wrong again. And for some reason, instead of closing my game or stopping the replay when that happened, I thought, what if I just fly around and explore the world in that state for a bit? It really did not take long before my PC just froze, to the point where I had to force shut it down, and then it just did not turn back on. Not a single sign of life. At that point, I genuinely thought I had killed my PC just a few days before the deadline. I even started tearing my PC apart. I unscrewed the power button because it felt weirdly soft. I even opened the case and manually connected the power pins together to completely bypass the power button. And I got nothing. I assumed my power supply just died in front of me and already started asking my friends for help to replace it as soon as possible. But then, out of nowhere, the next day it turned back on. I think what happened is that my power supply went into some kind of safety mode, probably because of overheating. But anyway, that was a huge relief and I just decided to drop that idea. Reconnecting is fine. After my PC got its well-deserved night of sleep, I added the last major feature, FOV. Field of view is really important for cinematic shots. It controls how wide or zoomed in the camera view is. The problem is that there is currently no proper way to change the client's FOV from the server. Except, I swear that's the last crazy workaround, with fluids. In Hytale, fluids can have an FOV modifier, meaning that if I can make the client think that you are inside a specific fluid, the FOV would change. So I created a bunch of custom fluids with different FOV modifiers, and then when the editor needs a specific FOV, it tells the client, you are inside this fluid now, even though you're not. And that changes the FOV. It's not perfect, as you can see those caustics on the ground now, but it works. I even made a zoom mod with that same trick. And with that, the mod is finally ready to submit. Somehow I made the deadline. I posted my progress on Twitter and the community feedback was honestly amazing. The contest had hundreds of participants, which is crazy, and Replay ended up reaching the finalists of the experiences category. And I did not win. But honestly, reaching the finalists with my first Hytale mod was already insane. I'll keep improving the mod and maybe build even more Hytale tools in the future. This was my first video, so let me know what you think. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.